Hey everybody, Matt Johnston here, and I'm back with another legal update. I had an interesting call with a client yesterday, and the situation that he described could have been complex, I guess. It certainly was complex from his point of view, but it raises a number of questions that I know a lot of my clients are starting to have. And that is a question revolving around race, and particularly race discrimination, racial discrimination, and the conduct and how an employee or employer rather should be handling an employee that they suspect might be willing to uh, bring claims related to racial discrimination. So let's be honest, we are at a time in our country where racial tensions are a little bit higher than probably the norm. It is something that a fair number of employees, or rather employers, are concerned about. And, and of course, when we are dealing with issues of discrimination, matters can get very heated very, very quickly. So this particular client, turns out that things worked out well for him as a result of events that had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on, but he did raise several key points. And the first of those is, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? So the answer to the question to avoiding claims of racial discrimination is really to have really solid, fundamentally good, sound HR practices. Now, one of the issues particular to this client is the employee that he hired had basically, I don't want to say fabricated, but certainly inflated the skills that this employee claimed to have. And as matters were assigned to this employee for work, it turned out that that employee failed to have the skills that were necessary to complete the job. Now, this person was hired just prior to COVID, and my client, the employer, made a vow to not lay anybody off during the COVID period if he could at any way avoid it, which is a fantastic way, except that that now puts you in a position of having an employee on staff that, quite frankly, probably shouldn't have been there. But my client did make an effort. So the question becomes, what do you do with an employee who has inflated their job skills, made themselves out to be better than they actually are, or to possess skills that they said they have or fail to have? So it's a good question, and the first is start documenting things contemporaneously. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily have to fire somebody, although lying to you to get a job is certainly a fireable offense. But if you choose to sort of work through it, that's fine. But every single time one of these issues comes up, you should be documenting it contemporaneously. You should have a session with the employee that says, wait a minute, you said you could do X, and it turns out you really can't. And that's not good, so we're not going to allow that to continue to happen. So maybe you let them slide the first time, but maybe the second time or the third time you start to take disciplinary action. If you are wanting to avoid racial discrimination claims, you also want to make sure that you're treating everybody exactly the same. So it turned out that this particular employee actually received more favorable treatment compared to comparison cases. When you're dealing with a claim of discrimination, whether it's sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, national origin, or any other form of protected class, there has to be a comparison class. There has to be somebody against which to compare. So if an employee is claiming racial discrimination and they happen to be African American, they need to have a white or Asian or Hispanic employee in which they could compare to say, I was treated poorly compared to this other person. If it turns out that the employee was treated better than the comparison case, the claim for racial discrimination becomes much more difficult to pursue and to succeed at. So when you are dealing with trying to avoid discrimination claims, you want to treat each employee the same. Now, facts and circumstances for each employee are obviously different, but when you are dealing with issues of discipline, hiring and firing, when you're dealing with issues of promotion and pay, you want the differences to be based upon policy-specific matters. For example, if you hire two people to be computer programmers, but one has 10 years experience and one has 2, obviously the person with 10 years of experience should be paid more and probably will be paid more. But you need to be able to demonstrate that based on irrefutable documentary evidence. So avoiding issues of racial discrimination when it comes to comparison cases just means you have to have good, solid, basic fairness when you are dealing with your employees. The other thing that I want to point out, that one thing that often gets employers into trouble with racial issues is a fear factor. That fear factor may actually result in a different kind of discrimination claim. Now remember, I told you that my client had the employee who was actually treated better than she probably deserved, but also probably treated better than her colleagues. So if you go out of your way to avoid a racial discrimination claim for an employee of minority racial background, you are often going to open yourself up to a kind of a reverse discrimination claim and saying, wait a minute, you as an employee are favoring these other employees over me. And if that employee happens to be white, it's still a racial discrimination claim. It seems a little odd to say that, but it's true. You can have what is probably very poorly described as a reverse discrimination claim, but really it's a discrimination claim. You as an employer have treated people of one racial group better than the people of another racial group. So in an attempt to avoid a negative impact when dealing with employees of racial minorities, you may end up creating a similar discrimination claim. It just doesn't look the same. So I understand that fear happens. I understand that employers are worried about the racial discrimination claims, and we should be. But you can get away from the fear, and you can get away from the possibility of successful claims being levied by simply having good, solid, clear human resources management and policies that are non-discriminatory, non-judgmental, those sorts of things, so that you can ensure that that's not going to be a problem. And the other issue is, of course, one of publicity. I'm a big believer that truth eventually wins out. I know that doesn't always seem the case, but if you take a page from some other people who have been subject to sort of mob culture, sometimes the best answer is no answer. Just simply go about your business and do things the way you've always done them. Be better, but talk to your clients, talk to your customers, but making a public statement may not be in your best interest. The mob is rarely interested in your apology, and sooner or later somebody else is going to offend the mob and they will move on from you. So have good HR practices and good relationships with your customers, and you probably won't have to worry about racial discrimination claims. In the meantime, if you have questions about racial discrimination, your HR policies, employee handbook, please give us a call or schedule an appointment using our scheduler link, which is down below. In the meantime, have a good day. Bye-bye.